Okay, hello everyone. My very long, convoluted title for this video is How to Explain Connections and Complexity of Rhetorical Choices and Earn the Sophistication Point on a Rhetorical Analysis Timed Right. This is a small little mini lesson that I gave in class this week, and it was the exigence of this lesson was I gave my first rhetorical analysis timed right, and I gave a lot of 1-4-0s. I gave a lot of scores. I scored a lot of essays that were well written, but I did not feel like earn that sophistication point because, as we know, as we've looked at in the previous videos about how to prepare for the rhetorical analysis essay, you get that sophistication point either through an advanced prose style, which again I've expressed how skeptical I am of awarding the point for that. Or I actually did give that point for one student out of 50. So that tells you how rare it is. Or through a deep understanding of the rhetorical complexity of the text. So that's the skill I think all students are able to learn with practice. And that's what I want to model for you today. So with that said, understanding that it requires using that information from the blurb, understanding the rhetorical situation fully, but then also being able to identify those choices in a text and then explain how they work together to achieve the writer's purpose, okay, or the speaker's purpose. So to model this, I have a guest speaker. It is spooky season. Today, as I record this, it is October 29th, and I have recently been dabbling with Ouija boards, tarot cards, things of that nature, and I was able to acquire a guest speaker for my classes this week, and I will let him take over for the next part of this video. One thing I'm going to note, though, before I bring in the guest speaker, I almost forgot. As the guest speaker talks, imagine this. The guest speaker was talking to an audience of students at John CHAMPE High School digitally. But that's who the audience is, John CHAMPE students at a high school in Aldie, Virginia, in the United States. This is taking place in the year 2020. Let's see. I haven't told you who the speaker is yet, but he will identify himself. And I'm not going to tell you what the purpose is, but as you listen to the speech, it should become abundantly clear, hopefully, what his purpose is. So I want you to try to figure out what are some of the choices being made to achieve this purpose. And then the deeper thing we're going to look at is how do these choices work together to achieve that purpose? All right. So with that said, now I will bring in the guest speaker. Hello, children. Good afternoon. You students have made me exceedingly proud. I am John CHAMPE. I am the person for whom this school is named. I was born in 1726 and I died in 1801. But I have risen to come talk with you today in the year 2020. You students have made me exceedingly proud. All of you are hardworking, intelligent, and devoted scholars. Some of you are highly skilled in athletics. Some of you have continued the fine equestrian traditions of Loudoun County. Many of you have journeyed to South Riding from different parts of the world and are now contributing positively to our beautiful Northern Virginia community. You are, for the most part, respectful toward your parents, and you do not idle away your daytime with frivolities. For all these reasons, I am exceedingly proud that you attend the school that bears my name. However, I am gravely concerned with one part of your behavior. In the short time since I have risen from my grave, I have noticed that the American youth are infatuated, nay, obsessed, with one Harry Styles, who belongs to our sworn enemy across the Atlantic. Perhaps in ignorance you did not know this, but this boy is a redcoat. It pains me to the core of my being that after risking my safety, my property, and my life to rid our country of English filth, that I would now awaken to see my descendants, my children's 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 children, now worship a long-haired baritone who swears his allegiance to the British monarchy? Has it come to this, that our values have eroded to the point where we have forgotten the great crimes done against our country by King George? Do you so easily forget the taxation without representation, the quartering of soldiers, the repudiation of our basic rights? Is this worth ignoring just to enjoy the music of this young fop whom you call Huzzah? I therefore must demand that you hereby cease all patronage with this Harry Styles. I will also add this extends to any other form of British culture, including but not limited to the chronicles of that demonic boy Harry Potter, the soccer club Manchester United, and the Netflix TV show The Great British Bake Off. Cast all these imperial tokens into a bonfire and let us never speak of them again. Do this, and you will have honored my memory sufficiently. Fail me, and I will haunt you for the rest of your life. Have a nice day. Ooh. All right, so our guest speaker, as he identified himself, was John Champe. So risen from the grave, the namesake of the high school at which I teach. Just for context, in case if you are watching this video and you don't go to John Champe, I can't imagine what you are thinking right now. You're probably smashing the unsubscribe button as fast as you can, right? But the school I teach at is called John Champe High School. It is named after an extremely obscure person who was a member of Light Horse Harry Lee's cavalry during the Revolutionary War and was in charge of tracking down Benedict Arnold, but failed. But really one of the few notable historical residents in this area, and they chose to name the school after him. And I chose to summon him from the dead to speak to my students. Here's the text of his speech right here. So he is our speaker. Now, I asked my students in class this week when he spoke, I said, so is there anything significant about him other than his name? I always try to get them thinking about who is the speaker? Why does that matter? Because the more you can make out of that, the better. Well, he is the namesake of the school. He is risen from the dead. And let's we won't factor that into his rhetorical choices, but maybe we should. But the fact that he is a namesake gives him a certain degree of clout or authority as to some of the things he's going to be saying to them, right? His purpose, as hopefully you were able to see, was you could be very specific and say he wants students to stop listening to Harry Styles, but really it extends, as we see, to just all British culture. He wants students to renounce the influence of British culture. So what choices does he make? He provided me with 3 paragraphs of this transcript of his speech, and I see many different choices being made to achieve this purpose. And I think we can have some very interesting discussion, or we're not going to have any discussion on this video, but we could craft a thoughtful essay picking apart the interaction and the complication of these choices, right? So assigning strong rhetorical verbs. The first paragraph, he was complimenting the students, right? You've made me exceed. And there's nothing negative in that first paragraph. There's maybe the hint of shade where he says, you are for the most part respectful toward your parents, right? But it starts off extremely positive. There's no mention of any sort of disappointment, but it transitions all of a sudden in that second paragraph to questioning the audience's values, identifying dangers, and highlighting his own personal sacrifice. It then ends with a call to action and even a threat. Now, a threat is not a very common rhetorical choice because you're starting to veer into fighting at that point instead of actually convincing someone. If you threaten someone, it might very well be convincing, but it's not because by virtue necessarily of your rhetoric. It's more about fear. So we're not even going to count threatening to haunt them as a rhetorical choice. We're not going to analyze that. What I want to look at is how complimenting the students sets them up to be criticized and to be motivated to renounce Harry Styles and all British culture. Okay. So I wrote 2 body paragraphs. I skipped over writing the intro body paragraph in the interest of time because I've been grading timed writes and I'm I'm going to take a break this evening. But I did want to record this before Halloween because I would feel so ridiculous recording this after Halloween. But that said, so let's pretend like I'm doing this like a timed write. And indeed, I was writing this as fast as students would have to write a timed write. And my thesis is, in order to convince students to renounce British culture, John Champe compliments students and highlights his own personal sacrifices. So those are the two choices we're going to be identifying and trying to look at the complexity of that interaction in these two body paragraphs. So here's my first body paragraph. John Champe begins his speech by first establishing a strong connection with his audience of 21st century students. He mentions his pride to have such, quote, hardworking, intelligent, devoted scholars attending his school with his name. By complimenting the students, Champe appeals to the pride of his teenage audience. Teenagers are especially hostile to criticism from adults, let alone adults who have been dead for 2 centuries. Champe is careful to have his audience as receptive as possible before dropping his ultimatum that they must renounce British culture. Indeed, he is careful to highlight not just his audience's intelligence, but their attention to athletics and to their continuation of the community's, quote, equestrian tradition. His audience, most of whom have spent the past 3 years attending a school that bears his name, would be delighted to have such universal and unqualified praise heaped on them. By beginning with compliments, John Champe sets up his audience to be as receptive as possible for his tough ultimatum to renounce British culture. Now, as I'm reading this over, that I don't like how repetitive my synthesis was at the end there. I could have perhaps added or maybe gone back and revised because didn't I just say he made him receptive for his ultimatum? Yeah. He is careful to have his audience receptive as possible. So again, I think I've said this before. I would prefer you be repetitive about an important point of analysis than to just have nothing or to not say something at all, right? So let's just pretend this is a timed write. And if I saw that, I wouldn't dock points. I would say, hey, you're being kind of repetitive. In the interest of revising it, though, I might actually go back and add a little something about authority and how Champe was a noted horseback rider and was also, a noted man of the community in South Riding. So this praise, apart from coming from a person who the school is named after, would also mean a lot to these students who are hearing this from a ghost or from a risen corpse, a skeleton out of the ground, right? So that's how I might, if I had time and I was looking over that and I was like, oh, hey, I'm being repetitive there. That's how I might think of another way to add a different appeal as I'm analyzing it. Or, yeah, because I was going to say maybe I could do a logic or identify a logical appeal, but in reading this first paragraph, there is a little logic. He comments on the diversity of South Riding and how much that makes him happy. You could say how that he is citing facts about the community, and you could say how that shows that he understands his audience, and that would make them even more receptive, that he's not just spouting hot air to an audience he knows nothing about. He's aware of the diversity of the culture of South Riding, and that would make them even more receptive to hear what he has to say. Okay, so let's move on to the second body paragraph. Now, this is where, so a lot of students did a great job at writing that strong first body paragraph, but then they would write a second paragraph that would begin like, the writer then, or Madeleine Albright next, or does this, or what was the other one? It is Cesar Chavez continues by, they would make attempts at transitions, but most students didn't understand what I mean by meaningful transitions, or if they understood it, they were not performing the way I wanted them to. And by that, I mean, I want you to explain how that prior tactic that you identified sets the table for the next one. And here's where I do it. Having now flattered his audience, Champe highlights his own personal sacrifice in order to guilt students into renouncing British culture. He has the tone of a weary parent reflecting on the sorrow of seeing South Riding students partake in British culture, quote, after risking my safety, my property, and my life, end quote. This is primarily an appeal to the student's sense of shame. Now notice, I'm not saying emotion. I'm being more specific. I'm saying shame. No one wants to disappoint an authority figure, especially after they have sacrificed have been made on your behalf. All right, I've got to fix that. But again, it's a timed right. We understand it's a draft. After they've sacrificed so much, and in all the papers I was scoring, if I saw like a little small error like that, I would certainly not dock any sort of points for that. So stay out of my, don't chirp in the comments. Just can it. And students would be likely to consider perhaps turning away from British culture to satisfy someone who has risked so much for their freedom from tyranny 2 centuries later. So I don't call them the audience. I keep referring to them as students. I'm being more specific about that. I'm specific about the emotion. And then I explain how I'm connecting those dots about how it would convince them to act and achieve his purpose, to turn away from British culture, to satisfy someone who has risked so much for their freedom from tyranny 2 centuries later. I'm even then also referencing the context a little bit. This is an odd situation. It's coming from someone who did all this in the 1700s. All right, CHAMPE even references this century-spanning disappointment, decrying how, quote, my children's 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 children now worship a long-haired baritone who swears his allegiance to the British monarchy, end quote. After hearing such bitter invective, most students would feel a great sense of shame at disappointing someone who has clearly sacrificed much, and what's more, has just expressed such a high level of respect and pride for him. So that's very important. I'm teetering on being repetitive right there. Like, yes, we get it. He's guilting them right there. But also, he has already expressed such a high level of respect and pride. That's referencing back to that first choice. So I'm explaining how using that, that he complimented them at the beginning to get them buttered up, to get them feeling good about themselves, and to get them more receptive to hearing this very cutting criticism and being more receptive to perhaps acting on it. Students would therefore consider renouncing British culture, not wanting to disappoint someone who has done so much for them and who ultimately values their achievements. So in that synthesis, I'm combining almost both of those choices. I'm referencing how both of those choices are working together to create an emotional state in students where they feel guilty and they will renounce British culture, as I said. So, is there anything else after this? No, there's not. So that is what it looks like for me, what I want to see to give sophistication. That to me shows sophistication. Now you could argue that I'm modeling this in a very weird, impractical way. And yeah, that's probably true. There would probably be way more practical ways to do this, but sometimes I think it's helpful to go outside the box a little bit. And could I have just gone back to one of the timed rights that I gave and done that? I guess I could have, but I felt like this could be a very immediate and hopefully memorable way of thinking about it, of seeing it applied. So with that said, I guess that's the lesson I want you to take from this, that to get that sophistication, most students have gotten good enough at identifying choices and using those strong rhetorical verbs and understanding how to pick apart the appeals inherent in those. Now it just becomes explaining how they work together to achieve the purpose. The purpose in this, renounce British culture. How does he do it? He compliments, but then criticizes, which works with his audience. And his audience are teenagers. And I commented on that. Teenagers are a very tough group of people to convince sometimes, especially if you tell them to not do something that they don't want to stop doing. So you have to be very strategic. Effective rhetoric is highly strategic. So your writing has to show an understanding of that in order to earn the sophistication point. If it doesn't show that, you get a 140 or a 130. So we don't want that though. And I've told my students, maybe it's because I've only just been teaching the fundamentals, but I was pleased with the time rights, especially considering how little in-class time we'd had to really work through it. And maybe it's due to Oh, who knows what it's due to. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking now. I will hope you have a great Halloween. I'll talk to you again soon.